Sonic. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich, and we have a recurring guest here. Very excited about this. Is Maya von Rossum, rhymes with possum. She is the founder of Green Amendment for the Generations, and also the Riverdale
Delaware River Keeper.
That's it. Delaware River.
Sounds like
was that the high school in I think that was a high school in some 80s movie. Anyway, thanks for coming back on. Really had a great time talking with you last time, and definitely wanted to get you back on again because this is a really big deal. We were talking before the show about different fronts that we need to fight on concerning environmentalism and the protection of the planet for our health and the health of other species as well. I want to make really clear that a human-centered attempt here is probably not the best attempt. Because the whole problem, I think, in the first place is putting us as the highest priority on the planet, and that's not working out so well. Anyway, that's my little moral pedestal for now. Thank you for coming back on, and why don't we just start off? Why don't you give us a real quick summary on how you got started in all of this?
So I've been an environmental activist and attorney for 30 years, serving as the Delaware River Keeper, and we do activism, we do litigation, and fight the good fight to protect the Delaware River that flows through 4 states, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, as well as working to protect the entire watershed and everybody who depends upon the river, human and non-human, everybody's. And in the course of that work, we have been battling fracking very mightily. And in fact, the reason why there is no fracking anywhere within the boundaries of the Delaware River watershed is largely because of the Delaware River Keeper Network and our leadership. But in that journey, 2 things. One, throughout all of my years, I've come to experience the many ways that our current system of laws and governance here in the United States of America fundamentally fails us when it comes to environmental protection, because it's really focused on legalizing pollution and degradation rather than preventing harm in the first place. That's sort of number one overarching. But also in the context of my anti-fracking work, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there was a very, sorry, my cat has decided to find me again.
That's okay.
There was a very fracking was already happening in portions of Pennsylvania, and the law, allowed it to advance at quite a pace. But the frackers and government wanted to find a way to allow it to advance even more quickly. And so they wrote a piece of legislation. Literally, the frackers wrote the legislation. The legislators passed it. A law that was going to make fracking exponentially worse in the Commonwealth. Sorry, my son's taking. Thank you. I love you, Pookie. And what it was doing was it was going to make it even easier for the fracking industry to advance. So it put in place automatic waivers from environmental protection standards. It alleviated the frackers of the obligation to notify people on private drinking water wells that their drinking water had become potentially contaminated by fracking chemicals. It mandated that fracking operations be allowed to happen in the heart of residential communities, and much, much more. And my role as the Delaware River Keeper and my organization knew that we had to find a way to challenge and defeat this law before it got started. The thing is, here in the United States, if a law is passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, or passed by the Congress and signed by the president, you don't really have too many options as a private person. You can protest, you can, try to elect better people to office, but none of those things were going to stop this law. So we had to find some sort of higher power, some sort of higher authority to challenge it. And we recognized that actually in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution, past decades before, there was this powerful environmental rights amendment, what I now call a Green Amendment, that put environmental rights above the law and on par with other fundamental freedoms like the right to free speech and freedom of religion, right? Rights that are a limitation on government action that seeks to infringe upon them. Now, this amendment, while it had been passed decades before, had been badly used. People, frankly, used it stupidly. And so very quickly, the Pennsylvania courts declared it to be just a statement of policy. And under the law, policy is advice. You can take it or you can leave it. Right. In Pennsylvania, they left it. And so we had this powerful amendment in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, but it didn't do anything to enhance environmental protection. But we felt at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network that this pro-fracking law, written by the frackers themselves, was such an excruciating overreach. Maybe we were in this moment in time when we could overturn that 42 years of bad precedent with regards to the Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment and actually defeat this law before it started. Long story short, we challenged the law, claiming that these provisions would be a violation of the Pennsylvania Constitution and the rights of the people to pure water, clean air, a healthy environment, and the duty on the Pennsylvania government to protect the natural resources of the state for present and future generations. And in December 2013, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court sided with us, and we defeated that law before it even started. And at the same time, we breathed legal life into this long ignored Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment. So I quickly said, wow, this is powerful. And I looked at what was it about the Pennsylvania Amendment that made it so strong. And I looked at every other state constitution across the nation. And I found that at that time, there was only one other state, Montana, that accomplished this goal of lifting up environmental rights to that highest constitutional standing. And I decided that I was going to change that and have this kind of amendment, what I call a green amendment, because it fulfills these key criteria in every state constitution across the nation, and ultimately at the federal level. I wrote my book, The Green Amendment. The second edition is coming out in November. And I just started, trying to inspire communities to want to pursue this path. And actually last year, we got a green amendment passed in New York State, and we've got more and more communities looking to advance this constitutional pathway in their states, but not in Illinois yet. We talked about that last time.
Yeah, I know.
So nobody from Illinois called me after the last show, but so there's opportunities still there.
Well, I'll talk to JB when I get off the show here tonight, Mr. Pritzker, the governor. I'll just give him a quick text. Well, that is very cool. And it's just, I'm like, so many things are going through my head as you're talking about all this, like the whole notion of like, a clean environment, a healthy environment as a right. And I don't know if we discussed this last time. I think we did. Rights are a very big deal to me because I have a philosophy degree, so I'm trained in ethics, and ethics is a very, very important part of reasoning about behavior and that kind of thing. And I think it's central. Morality is like the underpinning of all behavior. Like, whether you should do this or should not do this is a very central set of questions. And when I think about like what counts as a right, so the definition of a right is literally a moral allowance for behavior. A right is a right because it's right. It's literally that's what. Right. Okay, but our government doesn't. What's that?
I said that makes sense.
It does make it's like extremely intuitive when you hear that. Like, yeah, well, of course that's what it means. But our government doesn't seem to treat rights that way. They seem to think that rights are whatever the government allocates to you as a right. Like if they say like you get this right, then you can have it. Even the Declaration of Independence, one of the few things that our founding fathers actually got right was the whole notion of like you're endowed with them at birth. Like it's a part of your essence, if you will, because of your capacity, your natural capacity to reason. That's what gets you to moral truths or all truths and all falsities and that kind of thing. And it gets frustrating when I see the government, like the abortion thing, and they're focusing on like the abortion rights. Well, the right concerning abortion is a much greater than that, and that's the right to autonomy over your own body, which is a kind of a no-brainer. I mean, my body is mine. I don't see how you can see it otherwise in any rational sort of way. Anyway, well, congrats to you for getting that done through Delaware and then in New York. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I mean, Pritzker says he's an environmentalist. I don't know what's going on in Illinois. We'll see. There's all sorts. I mean, there's the you brought it up last time. The forever chemical.
Yes, PFAS.
PFAS. There's a huge issue with that here in Galesburg, where I live. They're suing the crap out of like all sorts of people in the state because of it.
Yeah. The thing is, about this idea of rights. So we all hear all the time how we have a right to clean water and clean air. And as you just so eloquently said, we do have that as an inalienable human right that belongs to us by virtue of the fact that we're people here on this earth. But the reality is in our society and our system of government, while this may be an inalienable right that we hold in our hearts and we hold in our minds, here in the United States, if you can't enforce it under the law, it's illusory, right? It is a right you are entitled to, but not a right you have. And
it's merely an abstraction at that point.
That's right. And that's what the Constitution does for us with these kinds of inalienable rights. It recognizes them as belonging to us. It recognizes that these are the rights that we, the people, kept unto ourselves when we agreed to be governed by government. We said government in our Constitution, you can govern over us. We agree to that. But these fundamental rights that we're listing in the Bill of Rights section, these are the rights that we are keeping unto ourselves. And when you govern, you may not overreach and infringe upon these rights. And very notably, which we could all recognize, in our states and at the federal level, the creators or the writers of the Constitution forgot environmental rights, or they didn't think they were needed, or they didn't want to include them. Who knows? But they're not there. And that is why we've ended up with this system of laws that where the environment is just like a chip in the political game, right? That people can sort of negotiate over and or purchase through lobbying dollars, right? Or it just becomes subject to the very vagaries of a political system that inherently is about negotiation and not about preservation, protection of these important entitlements of people, unless of course they're protected in the Constitution, in which case it flips it. But so that's really why we end up with this problem, because environmental rights were not recognized as inalienable rights in the Bill of Rights. They got left to this political system. And now we end up with a system of laws where government says, essentially, environmental pollution and degradation is acceptable. It's a foregone conclusion. The interests, the entitlements, as they perceive it themselves, of industry to pollute and to make money should be given primacy over the health and safety of people when it comes to the environment. And so if the government says it's legal to pollute, which they do through all of these laws, then it's legal to pollute. And if the government doesn't put in place regulation or legislation to cover something like PFAS, and there's nothing to regulate it, then it's a big loophole that the industry drives trucks through. And ultimately, it's the people who get hurt. And there's nothing we can do about it except protest and try to elect better people to office. That's where the Constitution changes all of this. When we have those loopholes and we have those gaps and we have a system of laws focused on legalizing pollution through permitting, and people are getting hurt and environmental racism is being perpetuated, we can turn to the Constitution to try to set it right.
Well, I mean, that's like, I think I said this last time too, is I don't really hold our founding fathers in very high regard. But the Bill of Rights is a pretty brilliant step in any sort of like governmental structure. And the amendability of the Constitution is also pretty cool. That it changes. You can change it with the times. And I think that I would guess that without having any real data, that the founding, like environmentalism wasn't an issue because there really wasn't anything going on at that time. It was pre-industrial revolution.
Well, I think yes, and first off, and I'm sure that I think of them as the writers of the Constitution. They really didn't found anything, right? Like our nation was already founded and inhabited by Native Americans.
Well, yeah, there's that, but yeah.
So I always think of them as the writers of the Constitution. But right. When you look back at the history books, right, there were quotes from Benjamin Franklin and other of those so-called founding fathers talking about how horrible pollution is in
okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, there are some, like in the city of Philadelphia, how polluted the water was.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they were spewing sewage into it. Now, I guess if you look big scale, but on a localized scale, there certainly were problems. But I think you're right. I mean, it's just overall, it was big, wide open spaces, and they hadn't yet experienced. Well, I guess no, because you had serious pollution in England and the other countries.
I mean, after I said that, I was thinking, I'm like, so technically the Industrial Revolution started in the mid 1700s.
So
So
they had
I might
experience.
have been wrong there. Okay. I'm going to check this out even more. The Founding Fathers and Environmentalism. There's got to be books out there somewhere. Real quick, Ginny Lester, who is a Green Party member here in Illinois. Hello, Ginny. She's asking, does your book have guidelines for how to get this amendment passed in Illinois?
So two things. So first off, the book definitely has guidelines for how to advance a green amendment in your state, whatever state you're in. But amongst the most important things that I advocate for and I ask, frankly, is yes, read the book, get the guidelines. And the book is not a droll, like legal tome. It is stories about real people harmed by pollution and degradation or benefited by environmental health, and stories of the people who have been working with me on the Green Amendment movement and how we've done it. Which leads me to the point of I really do want people to use the book and my website forthegenerations.org as a tool to help educate themselves and work on this issue. But I really encourage, please, rather than trying to do it on your own, get in touch with me. Let's partner up and work together to make it happen in your state, because there are a lot of roadblocks that will come up. There are a lot of issues with regards to language. There are a lot of false claims and challenges that will come from industry and their friends, elected to office. And I can help you anticipate those and know how to best respond to them. Right. I can share with you the strategies that have been successful in New Mexico and Maine and New York. No need to start from scratch in Illinois.
Great. That's great. Right?
Let's work together.
You're a fantastic resource then for all of this. This is great. Here, do you have a website that I can type in real quick?
Yeah, www.forthegenerations.org. And you can find fact sheets and information and training videos, a way to get to the book. And equally as important, I hope people think how to get to me. Like my most vibrant Green Amendment movements right now began, or that are ongoing right now, are in New Mexico and Maine. And they both began because one person in each of those states heard me on a show like this or read my book and literally picked up the phone and called me. And we talked and we got the ball rolling together. So it really just takes one person.
Well, that's very true of a lot of movements in history, if not all. Usually it's just one person says, this isn't right, we probably should do something about it, and then the ball starts rolling. Right. So is that right, for thegenerations.org?
Yes, it is.
Fabulous.
Yes, it is.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about being a lawyer, the law and environmentalism. And we have the EPA, which some claim, like libertarians, and I don't want to bash libertarians because they make some good points. They make a lot of stupid ones too, but that the regulation from the top down is really not going to do much. And they should probably, in fact, it's going to impede progress in a respect. What would you say to that? Do you think regulations overall are good, bad, and different?
I think it's a mixed bag. So again, first off, the way regulations and legislation are written, really they're written to legalize pollution and degradation, right? So they hop to the end of the decision-making process. They say, we presume pollution and degradation is going to happen. We're not going to work first to prevent it. We're going to work through reviews and permits, perhaps to limit the how, the when, the where, sort of manage the how, the when, the where. We're going to allow it to happen. But we're not at a starting place of, does it have to happen in the first place? And that's where the Constitution helps us with that transformational change. So I want to recognize and acknowledge that. And that's one of the fundamental failings, right? Because these regulations say, well, you can have a permit if you discharge X amount of pollution using XYZ technology in this location, or, so it's a little bit messed up in terms of the thinking. On the other hand, limitation is better than nothing. And so the environmental laws and regulations that were put in place in the 60s and the 70s, and in some places earlier, and, did help address some of the overwhelming pollution problems that were really just devastating lives and economies and jobs and business operations, because there was so much pollution in the air and in the water and in the environment. So the laws and the regulations with their legalizing limitation management focus did tamp it down to a significant and meaningful degree. On the other hand, they are now perpetuating it. And in many instances, there are gaps and loopholes for things like PFAS that are not being addressed. So those things are allowed to proliferate unchecked until regulation comes in place. So there's sort of that element of it. And then the final piece, when it comes to legislation and regulation, a lot of it has to do with who's in charge. So understanding that legalizing framework, there's still, you can interpret a law more stringently or less stringently. You can interpret a law to apply to this industry or not, depending upon your,
personal approach to law,
your personal political
exactly.
system, who's in charge, who's in the governor's office, who's in the president's office, right? There's a lot of wiggle room there. And there's also prosecutorial discretion. You can say, well, you know what, we're just not going to enforce it here. Right. And there's a lot of room for that to happen. So, that also becomes a problem. So that's why under some administrations, things are done better than under other administrations. When we have the Constitution, of course, it's not a panacea for everything, but we start to reorient government to necessarily be interpreting and applying those laws in that more protective way, because now those laws have to be interpreted and applied with an eye towards meeting the constitutional obligation to protect environmental rights. And when there's a gap in the law, people aren't left helpless. They can turn to their right to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments to try to enforce action, secure government, meaningful government action to fill the gap, right? The Constitution can be used to fill the gap. So it's never an easy answer. So there's a lot of no, there's a lot of yes, and there's a lot of gray in between. And I think the constitutional Green Amendment pathway helps us fill in a lot of the gaps and take us, in a lot of instances, from no or weak to yes and powerful.
Okay, but so you said that the law in many ways protects pollution and environmental degradation. However, I do hear a lot about lawsuits against companies. Like Monsanto has like over 100,000 lawsuits against it right now. And most of that has to do with Roundup and glyphosate. And they're losing a lot of those cases. You hear about, that's the only one I can think of right now, but you hear about corporations being sued and losing over polluting water or land or whatever else, causing damages to people's health. So, I mean, like, what say you about that sort of stuff? Like, how is that happening if the general notion of law and protection of the environment isn't really there?
Well, because so it is there. Again, it is there. It's a matter of how much. And so sometimes those lawsuits, and a lot of those lawsuits I've brought, not against Monsanto, but against other highly polluting dischargers and others, it is because those dischargers or those developers are discharging more pollution even than the law allows them to, right? And so the law allows them to discharge, X, and they're discharging quadruple X.
X plus
right? So you might be bringing if the law allows you to. That's another difference, the Constitution. You're entitled to enforce a constitutional violation when it comes to legislation. You have to have a law that allows you to litigate. But if the law allows you to bring that lawsuit, you can bring the lawsuit to help check that violation and bring those pollution discharges down to the legal limit, or require that industry to use the technologies the law requires that will reduce the level of pollution. So it is reduction and it makes things better. But there are also other aspects of the law, right? Having to do other areas of law, like nuisance law and tort law, where people are getting harmed by what a company or industry is doing, and the way the law is written, and because of the facts, what's actually happening, people can bring those kinds of lawsuits to get personal remedies, money damages, to make things right for themselves because they've been harmed by what that company is doing. So there are lots of different pathways that can be the underpinning for the kind of effort to prevent or resolve a problem like you're talking about. Of course, for all those people that got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and deadly cancers and illnesses, those lawsuits too often come too late, right? They've either lost their lives or they've lost their health or they've lost years of a healthy life or they've lost their jobs or they've lost their property values, right? All kinds of horrible things have happened in the interim. And that's really why we need to get here in the United States, we need to get on this path of not accepting pollution and degradation as a necessary evil, a foregone conclusion, but really get on the path of this is something to prevent first. Anywhere and everywhere we can. And that's a reorientation of thinking.
The whole pollution and environmental degradation as a foregone conclusion, is that legalese?
No, that's Maya-ese.
Okay. So that's not like written somewhere like, sorry, pollution's going to happen, tough shit.
What it says is when you read the legislation or regulations, right? I mean, it will say if you are this kind of industry using this kind of technology, you are allowed to discharge this much of this kind of contaminant, mercury, lead, TCE, all kinds of things. As long as you have this kind of permit from this particular agency, right? So that's the pathway. So that is legalizing pollution and degradation. That's why you have all these industries. They go into this permitting process and they say, okay, I'm allowed to pollute as long as I go through the process and I get the right permits. And yes, there's a comment period. And yes, sometimes we can get the government to say no or to more forcefully, implement or enforce the regulations and the legislations and get a better outcome or a different outcome. But at its core, that is what the law is about when it comes to the environment. That's what it's doing. And that's part of the problem. And it doesn't say, and now we have this vibrant, I don't want to say awakening, but finally a heightened and more appropriate, not even appropriate level of recognition that environmental racism is very real and allowed under this system of laws. So, as long as the 10 industrial operations that are already existing spewing pollution on that Black, brown, or indigenous community, as long as they all have the right permits, when the 11th, 12th, and 13th one come in that are going to spew also that same kind of contaminant and up the ante in terms of the level of pollution from here to here. Now, here it was already too high. Now where we're going to end up is even higher. But because when you look at that, each individual operation, they're meeting the requirements of the law, and the law does not require a limitation on cumulative impacts, we can sacrifice those communities over and over and over again by permitting all of those facilities around those same communities. That is very legal under this system in most places and spaces. It's how it happens. It's why we have environmental racism. It's why, again, communities of color, indigenous communities, low-income communities, immigrant communities suffer so severely at the hands of pollution and environmental desecration because the law allows it and in some ways even encourages it. Because they say, well, that area is already too contaminated. This area over here is still, quote unquote, pristine. Well, guess who lives in
Look at all the white people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but we're going to protect the pristine by continuing, to damage the already damaged, and that's this is part of the pathway for how it happens.
That's just repulsive.
Do you want to hear something in, a little side note that most people don't realize?
Sure.
And I often, as an environmental advocate, it is not uncommon for me to raise this point. And inevitably, every government official and every industry representative in the room, they just laugh or guffaw when I remind them of this, because they know it to be true. Actually, in the Clean Water Act, it says that there is a goal of zero pollution discharges to the waterways of the United States by 1986.
Oh,
that's the goal.
Wait, where is this?
In the Clean Water Act. That is one of the goals of the Clean Water Act, the federal Clean Water Act. Now, if you go on to read the rest of the law, it is all laid out in the way that I talked about. But that is one of the original, the original visionary goals. And yet, very early on, politicians and industry convinced everybody that that was an absurd, ridiculous, outcome, that it was unachievable, and therefore we should ignore it. And that's why most people don't know about it.
That's really interesting and terrifying at the same time, to think that their goal was by 1986 to accomplish zero pollution in waterways, and we clearly, it's 2022 or we're not even close to that. We
worse in some places, right? Through
100%. Well, look at there's the whole thing about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico because of all the pollution going into the Mississippi River and down into the Gulf of Mexico. It's like it killed like an entire huge, I don't know the exact measurements, but a large portion, significantly large, relevantly large portion of the Gulf of Mexico. Like everything in there is dead. It's just ridiculous. Again, that's terrifying to hear, because you realize that like it's just all these policies, laws, Clean Water Acts, whatever, it's all talk. It's all just somebody scribbled it down on a piece of paper, typed it into a computer, and then it satiates the minds of the populace until later on somebody goes, no, this isn't doing anything like they said it will.
Yeah, I mean it's really it's all only as good as, first off, the words written on the paper, whether, to what degree, how they're enforced, and whether there is this higher authority, which here in the United States legally is the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, that allows us to bring some semblance of sanity and say, we can't just look at this industrial operation and what they want to do, and even what the law says they're allowed to do. We have to look at it in context. If we put this industrial operation discharging that much pollution in this location, what will be the actual ramification? Is there already too much pollution there? Is there a school right next door? What kind of contaminants is it issuing? Yes. The people are going, oh my, you don't want any, everything. Like, let's not be absurd and ridiculous. Yes, Maya is not stupid. Maya knows that, every action and activity we engage in has an impact. Maya is also smart enough to know that we can live on this earth much more lightly than we do. We can live on this earth and we can pursue our lives and our livelihoods in a way that is compatible with the environment and compatible with nature, and doesn't kill our neighbors because we want to have more plastic this, or more, chemical that. There are other ways to do it. We can make energy, as we talked about last time. We can make energy with clean and renewable energy options that have a dramatically different footprint on the earth today and for future generations. We just have to stop listening to the fossil fuel industry and their pretense that it's not doable, number one. Number two, that somehow natural gas and hydrogen, these hydrogen hubs, are the solution. They are absolutely 100% not. They are part of the problem, and we need to be clear that there is this other path and that we want to take it. So, anyway, so before the haters start hating, and they will, and that's okay. I understand that human life has impacts, and I also understand that we can very significantly decide how much of an impact we choose to have, and whether or not we want to sacrifice our neighbors or we want to save everybody. And I think that we can genuinely save everybody if we can be smarter, and work together to make it happen, and really focus on the fact that we are people with a right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And we're entitled to have that respected and protected by our government officials and all industrial operators.
Well, all right. Well, thank you. That's very well said. Because I'm also thinking of like the naysayers or the people that are on this side of the fight. Oops, sorry. But don't think that renewable energy can be accomplished. Not the fossil. Like I'm thinking of people like they're like resistance groups, environmental resistance groups. Are like, no, technology is not working. We need to get rid of all technology and that kind of thing. It's not going to happen. First of all, secondly, I'm not sure it's true. I see their points and some of their points, but like for example, like, well, if you solve the climate change crisis, meaning the reduction, if we reduce to net zero carbon emissions in the air, and we still have the energy available to us to have refrigeration and hot water and computers and cell phones and vehicles of some sort, people are just going to expand and develop more cities and suburbs and stuff like that. And that land development is also a huge problem. Mm-hmm. The whole notion of our like our roads and highways and the asphalt, that causes massive amounts of flooding and problem, because what used to be soil that would absorb rain, it now hits it and flows off to the sides and does all sorts of problems. And so they just think they're like, no, the only answer is to stop civilization. I don't think they mean like nuke it or anything like that, but just stop having kids. Overpopulation's a huge problem. So it's some pretty radical options. I mean, what would you say to somebody like that?
Well, I mean, 100% development can be a big problem, right? If it happens in the wrong places, the wrong spaces, the wrong ways, absolutely. And I spent my 30 years as the Delaware Riverkeeper advocating for development strategies and practices that nurture the earth and absorb that water and don't have it run off, for all the reasons that you said. That's like I've spent so much of my life advocating on that issue. Just like with energy, there are ways to do development in a way that seriously changes the ramifications, the harmful ramifications in terms of the footprint, flooding, flood damages, drought, pollution, desecration of environments and ecosystems, right? And as well as getting the positives and, all the wonderful benefits that having healthy nature provides, because healthy nature is what helps us avoid those problems. But the thing is I think I don't think it really helps us solve the problem by saying, okay, if we're going to solve the problem here when it comes to energy, we're just going to presume that everything else is going to go to hell in a handbasket. How about we solve the issue on energy, and at the same time we work to solve the problems from this inappropriate development that happens, and at the same time we do work on people not having we do work on the overpopulation issue, and we do work on the plastics issue, right? And remember that reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle is at the end. That's the number 3. That's the last thing you do.
It's in order.
Right?
Reuse, then recycle.
Right. So it just seems to me, I mean, if one wants to make the argument that it doesn't matter what you do, we're gonna devastate and desecrate the earth and all human civilization. Well, you can certainly go down that path. But likewise, you could also join me on the path of saying, yeah, we have a lot of problems. And guess what? I got a lot of solutions for all those problems. And how about while we're working on solution A, we work on solutions B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way down the line? How about we do stop the ridiculousness of people getting in their jets, celebrities or whatever, getting in a jet to just fly across. Okay, I'm not saying stop all flights, but yeah, I am saying let's stop those single-use flights. Let's have some limitations on that. Let's be rational about things. And if people won't be rational, we force rationality through laws and regulations. And when that do make a difference, and of course, again, having this overarching constitutional right that helps us strengthen it all. And again, none of it's an instant panacea. I'm not saying that, but there's a whole lot of power in these solutions. We just have to work them and don't give up. Why give up? I mean, if you want to give up, okay, well then sit down, shut up and give up. And, that's
stay out of the way.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of us who, really like, I want the people who are here to have wonderful, enjoyable, healthy lives. I do not believe that people should be having tons of children, right? I do believe that nature has a right to be here. The critters and the trees and the rivers, right? They have a right to be here on this earth, and we as people don't have a right to decide, that they can be desecrated and devastated and sacrificed, for us to live the way we want. And for me to help ensure that their right to be here is honored, I've got to work it, right? I've got to work every single solution that I can. And as an activist, that's what I try and do.
That's very cool. Well, that's great. Wonderfully said. I mean, it's just like, I'm just thinking about it. Like, if I could ever get to the point where I'm like, and I mean, intellectually, sometimes I'm like, okay, it's over. I mean, nothing's going to happen. And that is more to do with like the futility of getting so many people to make the right changes within the right duration of time. Not that it can't be done, and with not that we don't have the means of getting it done. It's getting all the people enough people on the same page to do it. That's where I get frustrated. But I can't imagine just being like, well, screw it, I'm just going to ignore it and just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, kind of thing. I don't think I could ever just morally get there. I would feel icky inside.
Yeah, that's what I say. Like what's my choice? I mean, and I get asked these kinds of questions all the time. And I really like, oh, don't you get depressed? Don't you get angry? Don't you get frustrated? Don't you? Yeah, sure. But what's my option? Right. To like sit down and shut up? Well, if I sit down and shut up, well, yeah, for sure we've lost.
100%.
Right? We've lost for everyone and everything. So that's not really you're right. That's not like a real choice. It's not a real choice for somebody like me. And it sounds like somebody like you.
Yeah, right? No, I mean, just for a rational, moral person. I mean, it's not a legitimate option. At the end of the day, you have to answer to your own conscience. And if you have one that's worth a shit, you won't just sit down and let it happen. Choose there's so many different fronts to fight on concerning this, from, gardening to transportation of food to carbon emissions to air, water, soil pollution. I mean, there's got to be something that's kind of close to your heart. And that's what I would recommend. I remember Noam Chomsky talking about, like, well, what do you do when you get when you get riled up about what's going on? It's like, well, just like pick like a set of like 3 to 5 things that really get you riled up and focus on those. I mean, you can't do everything. There's so many problems in the world. Not one person can attend all of them. So like pick some that are really important to you and just try to do something, even as something as simple as having a podcast on Mondays. We're talking to wonderful people like you.
I think that is like the coolest, best advice. That is exactly. I'm just like, find the thing that resonates with you. Find the thing that you love, that nurtures your soul, even though it can be hard and heart-wrenching. And then, as you say, pursue it. And for some people, it's going to be advocacy and speaking up with their voice. For some people, it's going to be writing letters. For some people, it's going to be on social media. For other people, it is just like you said. I mean, one of my things that I do is I go out to my little piece of the world, and I've gotten rid of all the lawn, and it's all native landscapes. And nice. Yes, I have invasives. They're a pill, and I got to pull them. But, I'm out there with my hands trying to nurture nature. And at the same time, nature is nurturing me. And, and that is part. So for some people, that's going to be their primary thing, right? We're all different, but we, as you said, all of us have a way that we can contribute. And I like your idea. Pick 3 to 5 and hone in on them. I think that's awesome advice.
That's Chomsky, but thank you. No, Chomsky. He's the one that kind of got me all riled up on a lot of stuff. So, you know who that is, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes,
cool.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I would assume you did.
I can't honestly say that I've read him. I certainly haven't read him the way you have,
yeah,
but
yeah, no,
there are a lot of people I haven't read, but I'm aware of.
no, exactly. So okay, so let's talk. We got about maybe 10, 15 minutes left. I want to talk about like the legal efficacy of the environmental lawyers. Like, I mean, as a collective, what's going on there in that community? I mean, I'm assuming you can speak to that intelligently and responsibly.
Well, it's funny. I was just somebody was doing an interview and giving me a whole series of questions like along these lines. This is the thing, right? People, I can't say, oh, he or she or they're an environmental attorney. And I'm like, oh, really? And the person says it as though that means that this is a person that is, well, frankly, like you or me, fighting to save the earth rather than a person that's trying to help industry get off as cheaply, as easily as possible under the current system of laws, right? Like so many people, they work for law firms or they work for industries. Now they more often than not, they will say, no, Maya, we're really doing good because I'm working from the inside to change things, right? And right, I'm sitting at those meetings on the other side of the table from them, and that is not what's going on. You're advocating to try to get them off again as cheaply and easily as possible under the law. So that's a lot of environmental lawyers. That is who they are and what they do, and we need to be realistic about it. So then we have a lot of environmental lawyers that work in agencies, and many of them are really good souls who really are trying to use their legal authority to the best of their ability to protect the environment to the greatest degree they can. And on the other hand, at times, very often, we have lawyers and agencies that are doing the opposite, right? And again, it depends on the administration and the political will, sort of what their guiding light is when they're serving in those agencies. But there are plenty of times when, my adversary on an issue is the agency itself and the individuals who have chosen to follow a path that is the least protective path possible under our legal system, right? Again, we talked about you could do it better and you can do it worse. So, that happens plenty of time. But there are also a lot of environmental lawyers who are like me. I'm a lawyer. I'm licensed, but I don't litigate. And I didn't go to law school to become a lawyer. I went to law school to study environmental law to become a better activist, right? And
did you take it past the bar?
Yes, I
okay.
passed the bar in 3 states. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not really like kind of like, again, like who cares? Because all it really does is have me pay a fee every month to
the bar is one of the hardest exams a person can take.
Well, yeah,
there is a tip of the hat to people who pass the bar.
I don't know.
It's not as isn't intellectually rigid as studying philosophy, but it is pretty intense stuff there. A lot of my friends are lawyers.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I think I don't. For if you want to litigate, it's certainly a valuable thing to do. But if you don't want to litigate, it's kind of just like an exercise, and because you don't learn anything. Like to take the bar, I had to learn about wills and estates and corporations, and all kinds of crap that it means nothing to me, and certainly hasn't enhanced my advocacy. So upon reflection, knowing what I know now, it was really kind of a waste of time and money, but nonetheless, I did it. So it is what it is. But there are a lot of people with law degrees who are not litigators or working in agencies or working for law firms or working for industry, but are really using that knowledge in ways to help people through environmental advocacy, or like the kinds of people that are pursuing a case against a Monsanto, right? Like that takes a talent that's amazing. Like the lawyers who were the ones that did do the litigation and represented me in that case that I told you about, that pro-fracking case where we reinvigorated Article 1, Section 27. Jordan Yeager and John Smith, amazing people who used their talent and their time, right, and their love of nature and their knowledge of the law to make a powerful, meaningful difference. And there are a lot of people who got their legal knowledge who, are teachers and educators, or, doing all kinds of different things. Just being enhanced by the knowledge they have. But that's all to say, just because somebody says I'm an environmental lawyer, it doesn't mean that they're out there doing
that they're fighting for the environment, right?
That's right. That's right. Find out a little bit more information about who they are and what they do and how much money they make.
All right. Well, let me ask you this, and I don't mean this to be pointed towards anybody who it shouldn't be, but like I said, I know a lot of my friends. When I lived in Portland, Oregon, I met a group of people that were going to law school, Lewis and Clark Law School, and they were all friends. And I watched them graduate. I watched them all like get jobs at firms and everything else, and I'm still friends with a lot of them to this day, and other lawyers as well. So I would pick their brain about stuff all the time, and we would discuss things. One of the things I think that most people would find frustrating about lawyers, or the system of lawyering in this country at least, is the profit-making aspect of it, or the wealth-generating aspect of being a lawyer. I had a friend of mine who was in some legal difficulties. I sent him to a friend of mine who was a lawyer. The friend of mine who was a lawyer charged him $400 an hour. I'm like, you got to be kidding me, man. Like, for somebody's, a lawyer is a civil servant. In the role in society, their goal is to give the people in the general population access to justice. And I don't understand why they're not, the whole market or industry of lawyering isn't treated like a police officer and or a fire person like that, because that's what the same thing is. It's the same thing. You are here to serve society as a servant, that you're a civil servant. What's this whole, my point is, or my question is, do you find any of that sort of wealth gathering through being a lawyer, or an obstacle towards environmental justice?
I definitely think it's an obstacle. I think you're right. Getting access, it definitely is. I think, though, there are also in the environmental arena, we do have, not enough, but we have a lot of organizations like my Delaware Riverkeeper Network, where we litigate, and environmental, like the New Mexico Environmental Law Center, that is a nonprofit that gets grants from foundations, and they represent community groups pursuing litigation, or the New York Public Interest Law Center that does a lot of environmental justice work, right? So there are a lot of operations like that. Like Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we litigate on behalf of the environment and benefit communities, but I don't represent, like my organization doesn't we're not for hire, right? Okay. We're representing the river and me as the river keeper. But there are those other law centers and public interest law firms and law clinics that will represent people at generally no charge, and that's because they're funded by foundations. So that's really great. But I think you're right. I mean, there are a lot of lawyers, and I think particularly there are areas of law, like if somebody's challenging that bad development project coming into their community, often they need to hire a private law firm, and it can be very costly. On the other hand, if you ask and look around, there are a lot of law firms, a lot of lawyers who work for law firms who will do things pro bono or at low cost if you can really make the case and you ask. And then I think the other thing just currently to be mindful of, and this is a growing part of the problem, is the fact that, like colleges, right? Law schools are overcharging students, and students are coming out. I mean, my daughter just graduated law school. The level of debt that she's in is really serious. And it is great that the Biden administration, has this loan forgiveness for young people, which it breaks my brain when people oppose that. Like, well, I didn't get that, so why should these young people? That makes me so angry.
It's a
stupid idea. But even that $10,000 is a big help, but it's just like a little, chink in the armor. Right. So that is another area where I think is something that is difficult. And so she's working for a nonprofit. She's drawing a low salary. So she's struggling to figure out, like, how do I live life and live my beliefs and my morals, doing what I love to fight for the earth. But it's very hard. I mean, I have my law school loans too, right? And it's all very hard. But one of the things that and this is where I say to young people, one of the things that I hear a lot from young lawyers or people who are thinking of going into law school or about to graduate, right? And they make this remark that, well, I'm just going to go work for that law firm and make lots of money till I pay off my law school loans. And then once I pay off my loans, then I'll come back and do good environmental, lawyering to protect the environment. Then I'll work for the nonprofit or do the pro bono or whatever. And I say to them, look, number one, that's not going to happen. You're going to pay. I see it time and time again. You're going to get into the habit of having all that money in those big houses and everything. You're not going to turn around and now go work for a pittance for a nonprofit organization like mine, right? You just get that lifestyle. But the other more important thing, what I say to them is, don't sell out your soul. Don't sell out your morals. Don't sell out the earth, and don't sell out your communities. Because when those people die from the cancer caused by the toxins that you help to allow to get into the environment, when the forest is destroyed or the species is lost or devastated, right? When the child is exposed to the neurotoxicants that prevents them from being able to learn, right, properly, or to have ADHD or autism or Alzheimer's when they get older in life, you will never undo that damage. You will never remove that black spot from your soul. So don't sell out your beliefs. Try to find another path. And I say to people, and I mean this absolutely literally, when I was graduating, my backup plan is, if I could not get a job working for a nonprofit, fighting for the earth, fighting for the environment, I didn't even consider agencies as acceptable. My backup was that I was going to sell shoes. Now, at that time, I was not as mindful, right, about leather and all that, but that I had a backup plan. I was going to go and do something really simple and basic that I could just do to make money, and then keep my mind working all day long. And then in the evenings or the weekends, I would volunteer my time doing what I believed. And I figured I was sure to get a job selling shoes, right? Like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of other things that I could have done, but I thought, in my own mind, I was just like, that was to me, that represented that benign, the benign impact. Gotcha. That would allow me, not to sell out on my values or principles.
That's awesome. I mean, I think that the whole notion of moral compromise is like just kind of like an outdated notion nowadays. Do you know Ed McNeela?
I don't know him, but I see his comment.
Yeah, lawyers are not civil servants. Police and firemen and politicians are civil servant, and the police and fire are reimbursed based upon zip code, not value to humanity. That is correct, but this is the difference between descriptive and prescriptive, otherwise, or how it is and how it should be. I understand that lawyers are not treated as civil servants. I'm saying, if you look at what their role is in a society, they should be. And police and fire people should, anyway, okay, well, we'll do that another time, just because it shows. I appreciate your comment, and I really do. I'm not trying to disparage you at all, but we need to wrap it up, and we could talk about that another time for sure. The role of people in a civilized, proper society would be an excellent topic for a show, for sure.
Agreed.
But I read Plato's Republic, so just so you know, I got you, because he set it all up. Anyway, okay, well, real last minute, anything you want to say? Here's the website again.
Yep. If anybody's interested, just type in Green Amendment, and you're sure to find me. You're sure to find the book. You're sure to find the website. You're sure to find the movement. And if there is interest in advancing it in Illinois, I won't go in and do it, right? I won't go into your state unless I'm invited in. I'm kind of like a vampire that way. But if there's interest, individual, organization, politician, and you call me, I want to work with you.
Very, very cool. All right. Well, and as we close off the show, hang on, because I want to ask you something off here, okay? Very cool. Thank you, everybody, tuning into the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich, with our lovely reoccurring guest, Maya von Rossum. Thank you again. We're going to have you on again because we have a lot more to talk about, including some of the comments made by our friend Ed here. So until next time, everybody. That's right. Be good. Be green. Mm-hmm.